The Case of the Vanishing Heir. Chapter 1, A Midnight Summons. The November night was raw and bitter, the kind of Chicago cold that crept into one's bones no matter the thickness of coat or scarf. Allan Pinkerton, weary from the day's labors, had just settled into his modest study on Washington Street when a firm rapping shook the door. He glanced toward the clock upon the mantel, 11:30. Few callers came at such hours without carrying some pressing urgency. Rising, Pinkerton opened the door to find a young man, breathless from haste, his hat crushed in his hands. "Mr. Pinkerton?" the fellow asked, though his wide eyes suggested he already knew the answer. "You must come at once. My employer begs your presence, indeed insists upon it. He says only you can unravel the matter." Pinkerton gestured him inside, for the wind whistled mercilessly down the narrow street. "And who is your employer?" "Judge Horace Hallowell, sir. He sent me with his carriage. The judge is in grave distress, his nephew has disappeared." Pinkerton had heard of Hallowell, a man of formidable reputation both in the courts and in society. For one so distinguished to summon him in the dead of night bespoke a crisis of uncommon gravity. He gathered his overcoat and hat, instructing his housekeeper not to wait up, and followed the messenger into the night. The carriage waited at the curb, its horses stamping impatiently against the chill. Within minutes they were rattling through the deserted streets, the iron shoes striking sparks upon the cobblestones. As they rode, Pinkerton drew details from the lad. The missing man was Edward Hallowell, the judge's only heir, recently returned from Europe. The family had dined together that evening, and afterward Edward retired to his chamber. When his valet entered later, the room was empty, the bed untouched, and the window flung wide to the garden below. No note, no sign of struggle, simply vanished. They arrived at the judge's mansion, an imposing brick edifice upon Prairie Avenue, its windows ablaze with lamplight despite the lateness of the hour. Servants moved in anxious silence while the judge himself, a tall, stern man with silvered hair, paced before the hearth in his library. His usually impassive face bore the strain of desperation. He seized Pinkerton's hand with a force that belied his years. "Thank heaven you have come. My boy is gone, spirited away by villains, I fear. The police are useless. They would search taverns and alleyways, but I require sharper eyes. You are my only hope." Pinkerton inclined his head with measured calm. "Tell me everything from the beginning, and omit nothing, however trivial." The judge recounted the evening as already described, adding that Edward had seemed distracted during dinner, glancing often toward the window as though awaiting some signal. His nephew had only lately returned from Paris, where he had spent 2 years studying art. In Paris, too, he had squandered a considerable fortune and acquired companions of doubtful character. "I fear some entanglement has followed him here," the judge said darkly. Pinkerton requested to examine the chamber. The servants led him upstairs to a richly furnished room overlooking the rear gardens. The bed remained neatly made, a book of French poetry lay open upon the escritoire, and the casement window yawned wide, curtains flapping in the night air. Leaning out, Pinkerton observed the flower beds below. Despite the hard soil, he discerned fresh impressions, footprints of a man descending into the garden. He lit a lantern and descended with a constable to inspect. The prince led across the lawn to a side gate, which hung slightly ajar. Beyond lay the quiet street, where carriage wheels might have passed unseen. Returning to the chamber, Pinkerton examined Edward's belongings. Several fine suits hung in the wardrobe, yet one space gaped empty. In a drawer lay letters written in a woman's delicate hand, addressed only with initials, C.M. Pinkerton pocketed them for later study. He also noted a traveling valise missing from the corner, suggesting Edward had not been forcibly abducted but had departed of his own will, though hurriedly. When he conveyed these observations to the judge, the man grew pale. "If Edward has fled with some designing woman, God help him. I had hoped his follies ended with Paris." Pinkerton spoke cautiously. "There is yet no proof of abduction. The evidence points rather to a voluntary departure. Yet whether he went freely or under coercion disguised as choice remains to be learned." He then requested an interview with the servants. The valet declared his master had been restless of late, pacing the room at odd hours, receiving letters delivered by unknown hands. The cook had glimpsed a veiled lady in the garden the previous week, speaking with Mr. Edward beneath the elm tree. None knew her identity. These testimonies strengthened Pinkerton's growing conviction that a clandestine liaison lay at the heart of the disappearance. At length, the judge pressed him, "Will you take the case?" Pinkerton met his gaze steadily. "I shall begin at once. But understand, Judge, truth may prove more painful than ignorance." "Are you prepared for that?" "I would rather know the worst than live with uncertainty," the judge answered. "Bring him back to me, alive, or if fate has been cruel, then at least bring me knowledge of his end." With that solemn charge, Pinkerton withdrew to his own rooms as dawn paled the sky. He spread the mysterious letters upon his desk and began to translate the graceful French script. They spoke of secret meetings, of promises whispered in shadowed gardens, and of a plan that would soon liberate Edward from the chains of duty. Each missive was signed only with the initials C.M. The handwriting suggested refinement, education, perhaps nobility. But who was she? And what plan had enticed the young heir from his uncle's house at midnight? Pinkerton leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing with thought. The trail was faint but discernible, a woman, a secret, and a flight into darkness. The case of the vanishing heir had only just begun. Chapter 2, The Woman in the Letters. The morning after Edward Hallowell's disappearance dawned cold and grey, the city shrouded beneath a pall of smoke drifting from factory chimneys. Allan Pinkerton, having slept little, fortified himself with strong coffee before setting out to trace the first slender clues. The letters signed C.M. remained foremost in his mind. Whoever this mysterious correspondent was, she seemed the key to the young man's flight. His first step was to revisit the judge's mansion in daylight. The servants, though exhausted from a sleepless night, received him respectfully. Pinkerton requested permission to examine Edward's study, a smaller room adjacent to the library. There he found scattered sketches, charcoal drawings of Parisian boulevards, and several unfinished portraits of women. One canvas, partly veiled by a drape, caught his attention. Pulling it aside, he beheld the likeness of a woman, dark hair arranged fashionably, eyes large and luminous, lips set in a half-smile of promise. In the lower corner Edward had scrawled the initials C.M. Pinkerton studied the brushwork. Though crude in execution, the portrait conveyed intensity. Edward had not merely painted a subject, he had idolized her. The detective measured the features carefully, storing the impression in memory. When he returned to the judge, the old man's face tightened. "Do you recognize her?" Pinkerton asked. The judge shook his head. "No such lady has ever visited this house. Edward's acquaintance in Chicago is limited. He spent his boyhood here, then years abroad. But if she hails from Paris, perhaps she has followed him." Pinkerton did not contradict him, though privately he doubted such an open pursuit. More likely Edward had sought her company here, in some district beyond the judge's watchful eyes. Chicago teemed with boarding houses where strangers came and went unnoticed. He requested a full list of Edward's known friends and haunts. The judge could supply little beyond the names of 2 former school companions, sober clerks with little taste for nocturnal adventures. Pinkerton therefore resolved to conduct inquiries in the city's French Quarter, near Clark Street, where expatriates gathered in cafes and cheap theaters. By afternoon he was walking those narrow, noisy lanes. Gas lamps burned even in daylight, for smoke darkened the air. Peddlers hawked roasted chestnuts, newspapers, and cheap jewelry. In one café, dimly lit and crowded with immigrants conversing in their native tongue, Pinkerton ordered black coffee and listened. French phrases drifted around him, gossip of politics in Paris, of plays performed at the Théâtre Français, of fortunes made and lost. Eventually he heard a name repeated with lowered voices, Mademoiselle Céleste Moreau. Pinkerton leaned closer to a group of young men at the next table, feigning disinterest. One, a painter with stained cuffs, spoke eagerly. "She is beautiful, this Celeste, and clever. Many would follow her to the ends of the earth. They say she enchanted a wealthy American abroad, who now lavishes gifts upon her." Another laughed. "Not gifts enough, if she lodges still in Mrs. Brodie's house near Dearborn. Yet she speaks of a plan, always a plan. Something grand." Pinkerton had heard enough. He paid his coin, left without a word, and made his way toward Dearborn Street. After discreet questioning, he located Mrs. Brodie's boarding house, a tall, narrow structure with lace curtains and a faint air of faded gentility. He observed from across the street. Presently a veiled lady emerged, attended by a maid. She was slender, graceful, her carriage unmistakably European. Though her features were concealed, Pinkerton sensed he beheld the woman from the portrait. He followed at a distance as she and her maid entered a milliner's shop. Through the window he glimpsed her remove her veil. Yes, the same dark hair, the same luminous eyes. Satisfied, he withdrew to consider his next move. Confrontation would be premature, better first to ascertain her connection with Edward. That evening Pinkerton stationed one of his operatives, a sharp-eyed fellow named Riley, to keep watch upon the boarding house. Meanwhile, Pinkerton returned to Prairie Avenue to report progress. Judge Hallowell listened intently as the detective described Céleste Moreau. "A foreign adventuress," he exclaimed bitterly. "I feared as much. Has she lured Edward into elopement? Or worse, into some scheme to despoil me?" "Patience, Judge," Pinkerton counseled. "I cannot yet answer. But I shall discover the truth." He then examined Edward's financial records. The young man's accounts showed several recent withdrawals of large sums, funds taken in cash rather than check. Plainly he had been preparing for flight. Pinkerton traced the banker who confirmed Edward had collected nearly $5,000 only days before. That money, Pinkerton reflected, might now lie in Céleste Moreau's keeping. The following night Riley returned with news. The lady received a visitor after dusk, a gentleman tall and fashionably dressed. He remained but 10 minutes. When he departed, she and the maid packed several trunks. Pinkerton's eyes narrowed. Did the gentleman bear resemblance to Edward Hallowell? No, sir. This man was older, perhaps 35, with a scar upon his cheek. A scar. Pinkerton made note of it. Another player had entered the board. Was he ally or rival? Lover or conspirator? At dawn Pinkerton himself took up the watch. From the shadows opposite Mrs. Brodie's he observed Celeste step into a hired carriage, the scarred man at her side. They spoke rapidly in French as the vehicle clattered away. Pinkerton hailed a hansom and ordered pursuit. Through twisting streets they went until the carriage halted before the Chicago and Alton Railway Depot. There the pair alighted, purchased tickets, and entered the waiting room. Pinkerton, blending with the throng, heard enough to confirm their destination, St. Louis. At once he purchased his own passage on the same train. If Edward Hallowell traveled with them, discovery lay ahead. If not, then at least Pinkerton would uncover the design that had drawn him into their orbit. Before boarding, he dispatched a note to Judge Hallowell, "I pursue the trail southward. Do not despair. The case advances." The whistle shrieked, steam enveloped the platform, and the train rumbled into the night. Pinkerton settled into his seat, eyes fixed upon the compartment where Céleste Moreau and her scarred companion sat conversing in low tones. He caught fragments, words like inheritance, documents, tonight. Each syllable hinted at conspiracy. As darkness swept past the windows, Pinkerton felt the familiar stir of anticipation. The game had deepened. The missing heir was entangled in a web spun by beautiful Céleste and her dangerous associate. Whether Edward was victim, accomplice, or pawn remained unknown. But one thing was certain: before this journey ended, truth would surface. The detective folded his arms, closed his eyes, and prepared for the contest ahead. Chapter 3: Shadows in St. Louis. The train thundered southward through the night, carrying Allan Pinkerton into the heart of intrigue. He sat still, outwardly calm, yet every nerve was sharpened with watchfulness. Across the aisle, Céleste Moreau and her scarred companion conversed in low French tones, their heads bent close. Pinkerton pretended drowsiness, eyes half shut, but he caught fragments: inheritance, papers, midnight. The words hinted at conspiracy far beyond mere elopement. When dawn broke, the train rolled into the great iron station of St. Louis, smoke from dozens of engines hanging heavy beneath the roof. Pinkerton followed the pair at a discreet distance as they descended the platform. The scarred man, tall and commanding, carried himself with the air of one accustomed to danger. He guided Céleste through the press of travelers toward a carriage waiting beyond the gates. Pinkerton hailed a cab of his own, directing the driver to shadow them carefully. The pursuit wound through bustling streets, past brick warehouses and riverfront taverns, until at last the carriage drew up before a grand hotel on Chestnut Street. The couple alighted and disappeared inside. Pinkerton, after securing a room under the name of John Morrison, soon learned that they had registered as Mr. and Mrs. Duval, Paris. So Edward Hallowell's name was not invoked, an omission both deliberate and telling. From his chamber overlooking the lobby, Pinkerton observed comings and goings. Hours passed before Céleste emerged alone, veiled and gloved. She walked briskly toward the river, entering a modest brick house near the levee. Pinkerton followed, careful to remain unseen. The house bore a brass plate reading Madame Lefebvre, dressmaker. Yet within, he glimpsed not gowns but papers spread across a table, with Céleste and two rough-looking men studying them intently. A closed door prevented further view, but their gestures were urgent. Pinkerton withdrew, reflecting. Clearly, this was no mere tryst. The mention of inheritance, the concealment of names, the presence of desperate characters, all pointed to a plot against Judge Hallowell's fortune. The missing heir might be entangled willingly, or perhaps held in thrall by passion. Either way, the stakes had risen. That evening, Pinkerton set his trusted operative Riley, who had followed on a later train, to watch the hotel. Meanwhile, Pinkerton made inquiries about the scarred man. His efforts soon bore fruit. The fellow was known locally as Victor Armand, once a soldier of fortune in Mexico, later a gambler and duelist. He had arrived in St. Louis weeks earlier, accompanied by a mysterious Frenchwoman, undoubtedly Céleste. Their reputation was dubious, whispers of fraud and blackmail surrounded them. The following night, Riley reported that Edward Hallowell himself had at last appeared. He had slipped into the hotel under cover of darkness and been admitted to the Duval suite. Pinkerton's suspicions hardened into certainty. Edward was not missing through accident or abduction, he was a player in their scheme. But to what end? Was he to sign away his inheritance under pressure, or had he willingly joined their conspiracy? Pinkerton resolved to test the matter. Disguised in plain clothes and feigning a slight limp, he introduced himself at Madame Lefebvre's house the next day, claiming to seek employment as a clerk. Speaking in rough French, he offered his services in copying documents. The men eyed him skeptically but allowed him to assist for a small wage. Thus Pinkerton gained entry to their circle. By careful observation he soon learned the nature of their papers, forged wills and deeds, all bearing names connected to the Hallowell estate. The plan, it seemed, was to produce documents asserting that Edward had lawfully transferred certain properties to Céleste and her husband Victor. With Edward's signature, they could attempt to seize large sums from the judge's holdings. But Pinkerton also perceived tension. Edward, though infatuated with Céleste, wavered. When pressed to sign one draft, he hesitated, declaring that his uncle would never believe it genuine. Victor responded with anger, slamming his fist upon the table. Céleste soothed them both with soft words, promising that love and fortune awaited once the old judge yielded. Pinkerton, watching unseen from the corner where he copied, noted Edward's troubled face. Here was weakness, not villainy, passion leading him astray, yet conscience still murmuring. Days passed in this fashion. The conspirators plotted, argued, and schemed, while Pinkerton quietly gathered evidence. He copied fragments of their forgeries, memorized names, and mapped their movements. One evening he trailed Victor to a riverfront tavern, where the man met with hired ruffians. From their drunken talk Pinkerton learned that they planned to intercept a messenger carrying genuine estate papers from Chicago, documents vital to the judge's affairs. If those papers were stolen and replaced with forgeries, the Hallowell fortune could indeed be imperiled. Time pressed. Pinkerton wrote swiftly to Judge Hallowell, urging him to guard all deeds and securities with utmost vigilance. He then arranged to meet Edward privately. Choosing his moment carefully, he intercepted the young man as he slipped from the hotel late at night. "Mr. Hallowell," Pinkerton said quietly, stepping from the shadows. Edward started as though struck. Who are you?" "A friend of your uncle." "Do not fear, I come not to betray but to counsel." "You are walking in perilous company, sir. Victor Armand is no ally. Céleste Moreau seeks not your heart, but your fortune." The young man's face twisted between shame and anger. "You lie. She loves me. She would sacrifice everything for me." "Would she?" Pinkerton asked gravely. "Then why does she urge you to sign away your inheritance? Why does she consort with forgers and thieves? I have seen the papers with my own eyes." Edward faltered, his lips trembling. "She says it is only a formality, that my uncle would never willingly provide for me, and thus we must secure our rights." "Your uncle has sought nothing but your welfare," Pinkerton replied firmly. "He called me from my bed at midnight to recover you, fearing you had been kidnapped. He loves you as a son. Do you repay him by conspiring to rob him?" The word struck deep. Edward covered his face with his hands. I do not know what to believe. She has bewitched me. Yet I see truth in your eyes." Pinkerton laid a hand upon his shoulder. "There is still time. Break from them now. Return with me to your uncle, confess your folly, and all may yet be forgiven. But Edward, though shaken, could not entirely free himself. Give me until tomorrow. I must speak with her once more. Then I will decide. Pinkerton agreed reluctantly, warning him of the danger. As Edward departed, torn between passion and reason, Pinkerton knew the coming hours would prove decisive. Back at his lodgings, he prepared his course. If Edward wavered, the conspiracy might yet succeed. The forged documents, the planned theft, the dangerous associates, every element threatened disaster. Only swift action could prevent catastrophe. That night Pinkerton drafted a detailed report, sealing it for transmission north. He then loaded his revolver, checked his disguise, and set his mind upon the task ahead. For in the shadows of St. Louis, the web of deceit had tightened. The missing heir stood upon the brink of ruin or of redemption. And Allan Pinkerton, master of patient vigilance, was resolved that truth should triumph before another dawn. Chapter 4: The Forged Hand. The chill of November clung even in St. Louis, where the Mississippi breathed mist across the riverfront and lamps glowed like yellow eyes through fog. Allan Pinkerton, rising before dawn, reviewed the notes he had taken the night before. Edward Hallowell was torn between conscience and desire, and that weakness made him dangerous to himself and to the fortune that waited in Judge Hallowell's vaults. The conspiracy of Céleste Moreau and Victor Armand was ripening. If it bore fruit, ruin would follow. Pinkerton had long learned that conspiracies advanced in stages. First the whisper of affection, then the lure of gold, at last the act of betrayal. He believed the third stage was now at hand. By mid-morning he resumed his role as hired copyist in Madame Lefebvre's house. The room reeked of lamp oil and damp wood. Armand, broad-shouldered and scarred, stood hunched over a table where papers lay spread. Céleste, immaculate in silks despite the squalor, dictated phrases in French while Edward, pale and uneasy, attempted to copy them in his hand. The object was plain: to reproduce Edward's signature upon a forged deed transferring certain Chicago properties into Céleste's name. "You see, my love," she murmured, brushing Edward's sleeve with calculated tenderness, "this is only to protect what is rightfully ours. Your uncle hoards wealth he will never spend. With this paper we secure our future together. Is that not what you desire?" Edward wavered, pen trembling above the parchment. "But the date, my uncle will know I did not sign on that day." Armand growled. "Then he must be persuaded otherwise. Your hand is your hand. No court will deny it." Pinkerton, bent silently over his copying, absorbed every word. He noted the smudges of ink, the practiced strokes, the exact language. For value received, I, Edward Hallowell, do grant, bargain, and convey. A deed of gift, absolute and binding if unchallenged. At last Edward pressed his name to the page, though sweat gleamed upon his brow. Céleste kissed his cheek in triumph. "Mon cher, you have secured our happiness." Pinkerton felt his jaw tighten. The boy was ensnared, yet not wholly lost. His reluctance revealed conscience still alive. If only he might be drawn back before the final stroke of betrayal. That evening Pinkerton slipped from the house to confer with Riley. The operative, faithful as ever, had watched Armand consort with hired men again near the levee. "They mean to strike tomorrow," Riley reported. "A messenger from Chicago carries genuine estate papers. They'll take them by force if need be." Pinkerton's eyes hardened. "Then tomorrow we must be ready. Send word to the marshal. Quietly, no alarm. We shall catch them with forgeries in one hand and stolen papers in the other." The following day dawned bleak, the streets slick with rain. At the appointed hour Pinkerton stationed himself near the depot, hat pulled low. Armand and his ruffians lingered by a warehouse, feigning idleness. Soon a weary clerk descended from the train, valise in hand. Within lay deeds, securities, and correspondence bound for Judge Hallowell. The trap sprang. Armand's men closed upon the clerk in a narrow alley, seizing the valise. But before they could vanish, Pinkerton stepped forth, revolver drawn. "Gentlemen, your errand is concluded." For an instant surprise froze them. Then steel flashed, one drew a knife, another a pistol. Shots cracked, echoing against brick walls. Pinkerton fired once, striking the knife from its wielder's hand. The marshal's deputies, summoned by Riley, rushed in from both ends of the alley. The ruffians were subdued after a brief struggle, curses filling the air. Armand alone escaped, vanishing through a side passage like smoke on the wind. The valise, shaken but intact, was restored to the clerk. Pinkerton examined its contents, genuine documents bearing Judge Hallowell's seal. He breathed easier, though the danger was far from ended. With Armand still at large, Céleste's schemes might yet continue. That night Pinkerton returned to Madame Lefebvre's house. He found Edward alone, slumped in a chair, face buried in his hands. Upon the table lay the forged deed. "Mr. Hallowell," Pinkerton said sternly, "do you know what crime you have committed this day?" Edward looked up, eyes wild. "I never meant," she pressed me, "Armand threatened me. I signed, but I regret it bitterly. God help me, I wish I had never seen her." Pinkerton seized the paper, folding it into his coat. "Then prove your repentance. Aid me in bringing them to justice. Where is Céleste now?" "She has gone to the hotel, waiting for Armand. She believes he will return with your messenger's valise." Pinkerton's lips curved grimly. "Then disappointment awaits her." Together they hastened to the hotel, slipping through rain-slick streets. In the upper suite, Céleste lounged at ease, champagne glass in hand. When she saw Edward enter with Pinkerton, her eyes widened but quickly narrowed into disdain. "So, the faithful hound," she said coolly. "I wondered how long before you crept at his heels. Tell me, Monsieur Pinkerton, have you no gallantry, to pry into lovers' affairs?" "You mistake passion for plunder," Pinkerton retorted. He cast the forged deed upon the table. "Here is your handiwork. And here is Edward, ready to renounce you." Her expression barely flickered. "Documents can be denied. Words can be twisted. But hearts obey their own law." She turned to Edward, voice honeyed. "Do not betray me, mon cher. Remember Paris, the nights by the Seine, the vows you whispered. Will you cast me aside because this grey detective scowls?" Edward trembled, torn between desire and shame. Pinkerton spoke sharply, "Choose, sir. Your uncle's honor or this woman's ruin. One path leads home, the other to disgrace and prison." The young man drew a shuddering breath. At last he said, "Céleste, I cannot follow you. You have led me into deceit. Whatever I felt, it ends tonight." For the first time her composure cracked. Rage blazed in her dark eyes. "Fool! Do you think Victor will forgive such treachery? He will find you, and when he does, not even your uncle's fortune will shield you." Pinkerton stepped between them. "Victor Armand is already a fugitive, wanted for assault and attempted theft. His power dwindles. As for you, Mademoiselle Moreau, the law will judge your schemes." She laughed harshly. We shall see. My hands are clean, no jury will convict me of loving too greatly." With that she swept past them, vanishing into the corridor. Deputies stationed below would intercept her soon enough. Edward sank into a chair, pale but resolute. "I have lost everything," he murmured. "No," Pinkerton said quietly. "You have regained your honor. Wealth may be rebuilt, a tarnished name cannot." Outside, rain beat upon the windows, washing streets of their grime. Pinkerton gazed into the night, pondering the duel yet unfinished. Armand still roamed free, dangerous as a cornered wolf. Until he was taken, the case remained open. The forged hand had been exposed, but the shadowed scarred face still lingered beyond reach. Chapter 5, The Scarred Shadow. The rain had passed by dawn, leaving St. Louis wrapped in damp mist rising from the river. Allan Pinkerton, weary but unyielding, knew that the case could not be declared settled while Victor Armand remained at large. Céleste Moreau had been intercepted by deputies as she attempted to flee the hotel. Her veiled composure crumbled when faced with the marshal's authority. She was now lodged in custody, awaiting formal charges of fraud. Yet the scarred Frenchman had vanished like smoke. Pinkerton spent the morning conferring with Edward Hallowell, who sat pale and repentant in his lodging. The young man clutched his head in both hands. "If only I had resisted her. I am disgraced in my uncle's eyes. He will never forgive me." "You exaggerate," Pinkerton replied gravely. "Judge Hollowell values truth above appearances. Confess honestly, and he may still extend his hand. But first, Victor must be captured. Until then, you remain in peril." Edward lifted troubled eyes. "He threatened me, said if I betrayed him he would destroy me. He is merciless, Mr. Pinkerton. Beware." The detective nodded. "I intend to beware. Yet I will also pursue." That evening Pinkerton resumed his vigil near the levee, where riverboats throbbed against their moorings and taverns spilled raucous laughter into the night. Here fortune hunters, gamblers, and fugitives gathered. If Victor sought concealment, he would not hide in gentility but among those who trafficked in shadows. Sure enough, whispers soon reached Pinkerton's ear. A scarred foreigner had been seen at the Silver Lantern, a notorious house of cards and dice. Pinkerton entered quietly, taking a seat where he could observe without attracting attention. The room swam with tobacco haze, lamplight glimmering on coins, dice rattling across tables. There, at the far end, sat Victor Armand. He leaned across a green baize table, his scarred cheek gleaming pale under lamplight, eyes aflame with intensity. Gold pieces clinked at his elbow. Beside him lounged two river rogues, hard-eyed men clearly in his employ. Pinkerton ordered a glass of whiskey, though he scarcely touched it, and watched. Armand played recklessly, winning heavily one moment and losing the next, yet never losing his composure. His voice rang with command. Double stakes. Fortune favors courage. He won a sizable pot, gathered the coins, then abruptly rose and strode toward the rear. His companions followed. Pinkerton slipped after them, careful as a shadow. Through a side door they entered a narrow passage, then a low chamber lit by one smoky lamp. Here Armand spoke rapidly in French, unaware of the silent listener just beyond. "The woman is taken," he said harshly. "But she will not betray me. The boy is weak. I will drag him back. With his signature, we still control the inheritance. If persuasion fails, fear will serve. He must be reminded who holds the dagger." Pinkerton's blood quickened. Clearly Edward remained their target. Armand meant to reclaim him by force. At that instant the door creaked under Pinkerton's weight. One of the rogues turned, eyes narrowing. "Who's there?" Pinkerton stepped into the chamber, revolver leveled. "It is I, gentlemen, your game is finished." Armand's lips curved in a mocking smile. "Monsieur Pinkerton. I wondered when fate would deliver you. But do you think a single pistol frightens me?" He sprang sideways with startling speed. A shot cracked, grazing the wall. The room erupted, tables overturned, men shouting. Pinkerton fired again, striking the lamp and plunging them into darkness. In the confusion he felt a blow upon his shoulder, staggered, then recovered. He grappled one ruffian to the ground, disarming him. But Armand had vanished again, escaping through some hidden exit. When lamps were relit, one rogue lay groaning, another bound. Pinkerton questioned them sharply, but they muttered oaths and feigned ignorance. Still, he learned enough. Armand planned to seize Edward that very night, intending to spirit him onto a riverboat bound for New Orleans. Once aboard, the young man would be beyond immediate rescue. Wasting no time, Pinkerton hurried to Edward's lodging. He found the youth pacing in dread. "You must leave this house at once," Pinkerton commanded. "Armand plots to abduct you. Come with me." They set out under cloak of darkness, Riley accompanying. Yet danger lurked. Halfway across a deserted square, shadows detached themselves from an alley. Armand's men, 3 in number. "Take him," one cried. Pinkerton thrust Edward behind him, revolver gleaming. The ruffians advanced. Shots rang, a cry echoed as one staggered back. Riley engaged another with fists and fury. Armand himself emerged, knife flashing in gaslight. "So we meet blade to blade," he sneered. Pinkerton stood his ground. "Your schemes end here, Armand. Yield." But the Frenchman lunged. The knife swept close. Pinkerton parried with his pistol's barrel, striking hard. They grappled, scarred face contorted with rage. At last Armand broke free, slashing wildly, then retreated into darkness, leaving his wounded men behind. His mocking laugh floated back, "Another time, detective. Another time." Edward, trembling, clutched Pinkerton's arm. "He will never stop." "He will be stopped," Pinkerton answered grimly. "The law does not sleep. And I do not tire." The deputies soon arrived, securing the captured ruffians. Yet Victor Armand again eluded grasp, a shadow sliding through St. Louis's alleys. Pinkerton knew the pursuit must continue until the man was in irons. Back at the marshal's office, Edward confessed fully, signing a sworn statement of the forgery attempt and Celeste's influence. His eyes brimmed with shame. "I deserve punishment. If my uncle casts me off, I shall not complain." Pinkerton regarded him steadily. "You have erred gravely, but you have chosen at last the path of truth. That alone may restore you." As dawn gilded the river, Pinkerton sat by the window, revolver upon the table, mind restless. The conspiracy had been broken, yet not destroyed. Céleste lay in custody, but Armand roamed free, cunning and vengeful. Until he was captured, Edward remained endangered, Judge Hallowell's fortune insecure, and justice incomplete. Thus the hunt must go on. The scarred shadow still walked the streets, and Allan Pinkerton would not rest until the final net closed. Chapter 6, Trap on the River. The Mississippi rolled wide and restless beneath a pale sky, its waters carrying barges, ferryboats, and the tall stacked steamers that churned southward to New Orleans. To Allan Pinkerton, the river was both highway and hiding place. Victor Armand, elusive as smoke, would inevitably attempt escape along its winding course. Rumor from the marshals confirmed his plan. A riverboat departing at twilight bore his passage, concealed under a false name. Pinkerton rose early, devising his stratagem. He knew direct arrest upon the crowded dock might end in bloodshed, endangering innocent passengers. Armand, desperate, would fight like a cornered wolf. Instead, Pinkerton resolved to lure him into exposure mid-voyage, where flight was impossible and accomplices few. He summoned Riley, giving quiet orders. "Secure us cabins aboard the Belle of St. Louis. We embark as ordinary travelers. Keep your eyes upon every stranger who boards. If Armand shows his scarred cheek, we must be ready." By late afternoon the docks swarmed with humanity, traders shouting, stevedores heaving bales, families embracing, gamblers eyeing marks. Smoke curled from the Belle's tall funnels, mingling with cries of vendors. Pinkerton and Riley, blending with the throng, observed every boarding passenger. At last they glimpsed him, Victor Armand, cloak pulled high, hat slouched low, yet unmistakable by the cruel scar slashing his cheek. He carried a single valise and walked with the confidence of one who believes pursuit outwitted. Pinkerton allowed him to pass unchallenged. The detective and his aide boarded separately, securing their positions. The paddle wheels thrashed, whistles bellowed, and the great steamer swung into the current, leaving St. Louis behind. For 2 days Pinkerton shadowed Armand discreetly. The Frenchman spent hours upon the gaming tables, fleecing farmers and clerks with practiced ease. At night he walked the decks alone, gazing southward as though already envisioning triumph in New Orleans. Céleste's capture had not cooled his ambition, rather it drove him to seize the prize alone. Pinkerton marked his every movement, waiting for the moment when justice might fall without warning. On the third night a storm descended, lashing rain against deck planks, wind howling through rigging. The steamer labored against swollen current. Passengers huddled indoors while lamps flickered. Pinkerton chose this moment to strike. He summoned Riley and 2 deputies who had traveled incognito at his request. "Armand grows careless," Pinkerton said. "Tonight he believes himself secure. We shall prove him mistaken. He carries forged deeds in that valise, evidence enough to end him. We will confront him in his cabin, swiftly and decisively." They moved silently down the narrow passage. At the appointed door Pinkerton raised his hand. One deputy rapped sharply. "Who disturbs me?" Armand's voice growled from within. "River inspection," the deputy replied. "Open in the name of the company." The latch clicked. The door swung wide. Pinkerton stepped forward, revolver level. "Victor Armand, you are under arrest." For a heartbeat surprise froze the Frenchman. Then fury lit his eyes. He hurled the lamp from the table, plunging the cabin into darkness, and leapt through the window onto the rain-swept deck. Shouts erupted, passengers stirred in alarm. Pinkerton pursued at once, water lashing his face. Across the slippery planks they raced, lightning flashing, paddle wheels thundering. Armand turned, pistol blazing. A ball tore Pinkerton's sleeve but missed flesh. Pinkerton fired back, splintering rail beside the fugitive. Still Armand pressed on, agile despite the storm. At the stern he wheeled suddenly, knife gleaming, and rushed upon his pursuers. Riley grappled him, the blade slicing his coat. Pinkerton struck hard with pistol but Armand fought like a demon, teeth bared, scar livid. Rain slicked the deck, men slipped and slid, passengers screamed from the saloon windows. At last, with one desperate wrench, Armand broke free and vaulted the rail. He plunged into the black river, swallowed instantly by waves. The steamer's lanterns cast trembling light but revealed only churned foam. No cry arose, no body surfaced. The Mississippi had claimed him. Riley, panting, leaned upon the rail. He is gone. Pinkerton peered into the darkness, expression unreadable. Perhaps. Yet men of his breed often rise again where least expected. Until his body is found, I shall not declare him dead. Back in the cabin they recovered the valise. Within lay forged deeds, drafts of Edward's signature, and correspondence with Céleste. Enough, surely, to convict her beyond denial. Pinkerton sealed the evidence carefully, satisfied that at least part of the web had been torn away. When dawn broke, calm returned. The passengers whispered excitedly of the night's events, marveling at the detective who had faced the scarred outlaw upon the storm-tossed deck. Pinkerton, however, accepted no praise. He thought only of Judge Hallowell waiting in Chicago, of Edward's fragile repentance, and of the possibility that Armand yet lived, drifting upon some hidden shore. Upon arrival at Cairo, Pinkerton disembarked with Riley and the deputies, escorting the captured documents northward. The steamer continued south, its rumor of violence already spreading along the river. Pinkerton knew tales would grow, how the detective had fought a duel upon the stormy Mississippi, how the outlaw had leapt to watery doom. Yet the truth, stripped of glamour, was that justice remained incomplete. Days later, back in Chicago, Judge Hallowell received him in the Grand Library where the case had first begun. Edward knelt before his uncle, confessing every folly, while Pinkerton laid the forged deeds upon the desk. The judge's stern eyes softened at last. "You have erred grievously, Edward, yet repentance may cleanse. Thanks to Mr. Pinkerton, ruin has been averted. You are my nephew still." Tears glistened in the young man's eyes as he clasped his uncle's hand. Pinkerton inclined his head. "The immediate danger is past. But be wary. Victor Armand may have sunk beneath the Mississippi, or he may walk ashore elsewhere, plotting revenge. Should he rise again, I will be ready." That night, alone in his modest office, Pinkerton wrote the final lines of his report. The heir has been restored, the inheritance preserved, the adventurous secured for trial. Yet the scarred man escaped into darkness. Whether drowned or living, he remains unfinished business. Such is often the way of a detective's life, the victory tempered by shadows that linger. Chapter 7, The Trial of Céleste. Winter pressed hard upon Chicago, the lake winds cutting like knives through crowded streets. Allan Pinkerton, though hardened to long nights of pursuit, found little comfort in returning home while unfinished matters awaited. Céleste Moreau, elegant enchantress turned accused conspirator, now faced judgment before the court. The forged deeds, recovered on the Mississippi, lay ready as evidence. Yet Pinkerton knew her greatest weapon was not parchment or coin but charm, the same spell that had ensnared Edward Hallowell. The courtroom swelled with curiosity when the trial opened. Merchants, clerks, and society ladies thronged the benches, eager to glimpse the infamous Frenchwoman whose beauty rivaled her deceit. Reporters sharpened pencils, eager to embellish every glance and gesture for morning sheets. Judge Hallowell, though not upon the bench, sat grim in the gallery, his stern gaze fixed upon the woman who had sought to ruin him. Beside him sat Edward, pale but determined to bear witness. When Céleste was led in, whispers rippled like wind through wheat. She wore plain garments provided by the jailer, yet carried herself with regal grace. Her dark eyes scanned the room, lingering a heartbeat upon Edward. He faltered, then steadied as Pinkerton's hand touched his shoulder in reassurance. The prosecution opened with solemn precision. They displayed the forged deed, Edward's reluctant signature traced under Céleste's guidance. They produced letters seized from her lodging, written in her own hand, urging him to break the chains of duty and secure their fortune by deception. Witnesses testified to her secret meetings with Victor Armand, her journeys to the dressmaker's house where fraudulent drafts were prepared. When Pinkerton took the stand, his voice rang clear and steady. He recounted his discovery of the forgeries, his pursuit upon the riverboat, and the recovery of incriminating papers. He described Armand's attempt to steal genuine deeds, and the violent struggle that ended with the fugitive leaping into the Mississippi. The courtroom listened breathlessly. At last Edward himself was called. Rising slowly, he faced the bench with shame plain upon his young features. "I was deceived," he said quietly. "I believed her affection sincere. She persuaded me that my uncle withheld what was mine. Out of weakness, I signed. But I testify now that she urged fraud, that she plotted with Victor Armand to despoil my family." A murmur stirred the crowd. Edward's voice trembled but grew firm. "I have repented my folly. I implore mercy, not for myself but for my uncle whose trust one betrayed. Without Mr. Pinkerton's guidance I would have been utterly lost." Céleste then rose for her defense. Her counsel, eloquent and cunning, argued that she was but a woman misrepresented, that love had driven her to folly, not malice. "Is it crime," he thundered, "to dream of happiness with the man she loved? She wrote letters of passion, not forgery. She sought a future, not theft." Then Céleste herself spoke, her voice soft yet penetrating. "Yes, I loved Edward," she declared, her eyes glistening. "I sought only to free him from chains of a cold and grasping uncle. If I erred, it was through devotion. The papers, these dreadful papers, were forced upon me by Victor Armand, a man of violence. I was but a pawn." Her words carried power. Even seasoned jurors shifted uneasily, swayed by her poise. Pinkerton watched keenly, noting Edward's lips pressed tight as though still caught between pity and truth. The battle now lay in perception as much as in fact. During recess Pinkerton spoke with Judge Hallowell. "She will attempt to twist sympathy into acquittal. But jurors require more than beauty, they require certainty. Tomorrow I shall provide it." The following day Pinkerton presented a final piece of evidence, the valise recovered from Armand's cabin. Within lay not only forged deeds but also a letter in Céleste's hand, addressed to Armand, detailing their scheme. "When Edward yields his signature, we shall compel the judge with both forged and genuine papers. The inheritance will be ours. Courage, mon ami, soon we triumph." The courtroom hushed. Céleste's composure flickered, though she quickly resumed her mask. Yet the words, undeniable, cut through her defense like a blade. The jury retired. Hours dragged. At last the foreman rose. "We find the prisoner guilty of conspiracy to defraud." Gasps filled the chamber. Céleste stood tall, lips curved in a defiant smile. "You condemn me," she said softly, "but you cannot erase me from his heart." Her eyes flicked toward Edward one final time before she was led away, wrists bound. Outside, the winter sun glinted pale on courthouse steps. Judge Hallowell grasped Pinkerton's hand firmly. "You have preserved my family's honor. No reward can match my gratitude." Edward bowed his head. "I owe my life to you, sir. I was blind, but you forced my eyes open. Whatever my uncle asks, I will obey henceforth." Pinkerton studied the youth. "Remember well, temptation seldom arrives with chains. It comes with smiles, with soft words, with promises. You have seen its face, may you never again forget. Yet as the crowd dispersed, Pinkerton's thoughts lingered on Victor Armand. The scarred shadow had vanished into the river, but no body had surfaced. Rumor along the docks whispered of a Frenchman sighted downriver, wounded yet alive. Until that spectre was laid to rest, Pinkerton knew the case remained incomplete. That night, returning to his modest dwelling, he penned a report for his files. Céleste Moreau, convicted conspirator, now awaits sentence. Edward Hallowell restored to his uncle's favor. Yet Victor Armand, chief architect of the plot, remains unaccounted for. His reappearance must be anticipated. Pinkerton laid down his pen and gazed into the fire. Shadows danced upon the wall, reminding him that victory, however great, seldom arrived without residue of danger. Justice had prevailed in court, but the scarred man's laughter still echoed faintly across the waters of the Mississippi. The detective closed his eyes, steeling himself for what must come. The game was not yet over. Chapter 8, The Final Reckoning. Snow fell thick upon Chicago, muting hoofbeats and cloaking the streets in white silence. Allan Pinkerton sat in his office, flame low in the grate, reviewing the Hallowell papers. The case of Céleste Moreau had ended in conviction, yet victory felt incomplete. Victor Armand had leapt into the Mississippi and vanished. Whether drowned or alive, his shadow lingered. Pinkerton trusted instinct more than rumor, and instinct whispered the man still lived. Weeks passed uneventfully until one evening a courier delivered a note marked in hurried French script. The scarred one walks again. He was seen in Cairo, limping, but alive. Beware. The informant's seal belonged to a riverboat captain known to Pinkerton for honesty. The detective's pulse quickened. The final act was drawing near. He summoned Riley at once. Armand has risen. He means revenge. Edward remains his target, perhaps even the judge himself. We must be ready. Edward, now more sober and chastened, had resumed work in his uncle's law chambers. Yet when Pinkerton warned him, fear clouded the young man's eyes. I will testify again, if required. But if he comes for me, I am undone. Courage, Pinkerton counseled. Fear gives him strength. Stand firm, and his power dwindles. Days later a strange report reached the detective. A scarred Frenchman had taken a room under false name at a riverfront inn. He met with rough companions, speaking of unfinished business in Prairie Avenue. That was Judge Hollowell Street. Pinkerton moved swiftly. With Riley and 2 marshals he set a silent watch. Snow swirled about the lamplight as they crouched near the mansion's gates. Hours passed, breath steaming in the frosty air. Then at midnight shadows detached from the alley, 3 men advancing toward the judge's residence. The leader's scar gleamed under the lamp. Hold! Pinkerton's voice rang like iron. Armand snarled and drew his pistol. Shots cracked, echoing against frosted windows. Riley returned fire, felling one ruffian. The other fled, but Armand pressed forward with reckless fury. He fired twice, bullets shattering glass above the judge's library. Inside, lamps flared as servants cried out. Pinkerton advanced steadily, revolver aimed. Surrender, Armand. The law has you cornered. But the Frenchman's laugh rang harsh. You cannot cage me, Pinkerton. Better the grave than chains. He lunged, knife flashing. The 2 men grappled in the snow, breath heaving, strength matched against desperation. Pinkerton felt the blade slash his coat, missing flesh by inches. With a mighty effort he wrenched the weapon free and cast it aside. Armand struck with fists, scarred face twisted in rage. Yet Pinkerton, seasoned by years of pursuit, held firm. At last he drove the outlaw to the ground, revolver pressing against his chest. It ends here. The marshals closed in, seizing Armand's arms. Bound at last, the scarred man spat curses in French, eyes burning with hatred. You think you triumph. But men like me never truly die. Another will rise, another scheme will bloom. Pinkerton regarded him coldly. Perhaps. But this night, Victor Armand, justice has claimed you. They dragged him away through drifting snow. Inside the mansion, Judge Hallowell clasped Pinkerton's hand with solemn gratitude. You have preserved both life and honor. My household sleeps safe because of you. Edward, shaken yet resolute, stepped forward. I will never forget this night. I nearly destroyed all through folly. You have given me chance to begin anew. Pinkerton's gaze softened. See that you use it wisely. Temptation comes swift, but redemption is earned slowly. In the weeks that followed, Armand stood trial. Witnesses spoke of the forged deeds, the attempted theft, the midnight assault upon the judge's home. Céleste's testimony, bitter and betrayed, sealed his fate. The jury found him guilty on all counts. His scarred face betrayed no remorse as sentence of imprisonment was pronounced. For Judge Hallowell the ordeal closed with relief. His estate, long shadowed by threat, stood secure. He turned greater affection upon Edward, guiding him with stern but patient counsel. The young man, humbled, devoted himself to rebuilding trust, studying law with new diligence. As for Céleste, she received years of confinement. Society's fascination with her beauty faded into scandalous whispers, then silence. And Victor Armand, once gambler and soldier of fortune, vanished behind iron gates. Chicago breathed easier knowing his schemes were broken. On a quiet evening, months later, Pinkerton sat again in his study, penning the final line of his report. The vanishing heir is restored, the conspirators unmasked, the scarred man subdued. Justice, though delayed, has triumphed. He laid aside his pen, gazing into the fire. Another case closed, yet countless others awaited. Such was the endless burden of a detective's life. He rose, fastening his coat against the lingering cold, and stepped into the winter night. Snow muffled the city, lamps glowed softly, and far off the river murmured. For all its dangers, the world still held order when men dared to defend it. Allan Pinkerton walked on, vigilant as ever, prepared for the next summons in the dark.